I was sitting in my old Ford pickup, engine idling, staring at a silver SUV parked sideways across the only road leading to my farm. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our local HOA, stood in front of it with her arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her nose like she was guarding Fort Knox. "You can't pass," she said, her voice dripping with that smug superiority only an HOA president can muster. "This road is for residents only. Agricultural traffic is prohibited." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. What she didn't know, what no one in that cul-de-sac knew, was that this gravel stretch she was blocking would soon belong to me. And when it did, the rules would change in ways that would make her regret every second of this little power trip. But that day, I just put the truck in park, leaned out the window, and smiled, because I already knew exactly how this was going to end. My name's Jack Peterson. I'm 52 years old, and I've lived on this patch of earth longer than most of those cookie-cutter houses in the subdivision next door have even existed. My family has been working this land for 3 generations, ever since my grandfather traded a set of prize Holsteins for the original acreage back in the 40s. Some folks inherit money, others get antiques or jewelry. I inherited clay-rich soil, a weather-worn barn in a stubborn streak thicker than the oak beams holding that barn together. Before the subdivision moved in, life here had a rhythm you could set your watch by. Dawn meant the smell of brewing coffee and bacon sizzling in the cast-iron skillet. By 7, I'd be walking the fence line, checking for breaks where deer had pushed through in the night. The afternoons were filled with the hum of the tractor and the gentle chatter of chickens scratching in the yard. Evenings ended with me sitting on the porch swing, boots kicked up, watching the sun set behind the grain silo while cicadas sang their slow, drowsy hymn. The gravel road that leads to my place isn't much to look at, just 2 dusty ruts flanked by wild grasses and the occasional stubborn sunflower. But it's more than a road to me. It's a lifeline. That stretch connects my farm to the county highway. Without it, no feed deliveries, no cattle hauls, no way to get my goods to market. I've been using it my entire life. And before me, my father and grandfather used it too. There was never a gate, never a fuss. It was just there, reliable. Then came the subdivision. It sprouted up practically overnight. Like mushrooms after a rainstorm, neat rows of beige and gray houses with identical porches and spotless driveways, each with a small regulation-approved tree in the front yard. The kind of place where kids' bikes are stored in the garage, not left in the yard, where grass is exactly 2 inches tall, not a blade more, where everyone pretends to be neighborly while secretly cataloging each other's infractions, and presiding over it all was the HOA. At first, the HOA folks kept to themselves, and I kept to mine. A few waved when they drove past my place. I'd lift a hand in return. But then Karen moved in. If you've never met a true HOA Karen, let me paint you a picture. Mid-50s. Always dressed like she's on her way to an upscale garden party, pastel cardigan draped just so over her shoulders, oversized sunglasses even on cloudy days, and a clipboard that seemed to be an extension of her arm. She walked like she owned every square foot she could see, and she talked like everyone else was breaking some rule she'd personally written. Our first real encounter was at the farmer's market. I was selling eggs and homemade honey when she wandered up to my booth, didn't bother introducing herself, and said, "You know, the dust from your road drifts into our neighborhood. It's causing issues for people with allergies." I told her I'd been driving that road since before her neighborhood existed, but she just pursed her lips and wrote something on that clipboard of hers. That was my first warning sign. You see, Karen didn't just live in that subdivision. She ran it unofficially, but absolutely. The actual HOA board members were little more than rubber stamps for her ideas. Want a new regulation banning certain mailbox designs? Done. Want to fine someone for having a pumpkin on their porch past November 1st? Consider it handled. And when she set her sights on my road, I knew it was only a matter of time before trouble rolled in like a summer storm. The thing about living in the country is, you get used to space to work, to breathe, to mind your own business. The HOA folks weren't used to that. They liked order, control, predictability. My farm didn't fit into their vision. Tractors, livestock trailers, and work trucks rumbling down their street offended their sense of suburban peace. At first, I tried to shrug it off. I figured she'd get bored and move on to hassling someone about the color of their shutters. But instead, she seemed to make my road her personal crusade. She'd stand at the edge of her driveway, arms folded, every time I drove by, like a one-woman checkpoint. Still, my life carried on. Early mornings in the barn, afternoons in the field, evenings fixing whatever broke that day, which was always something. Farming doesn't wait for feuds. Cows don't care if your neighbor hates your road. But I'll admit, there was a tension in the air now. The easy coexistence between me and the subdivision was gone, replaced by the sense that I was being watched, measured, and found lacking according to some unwritten rulebook. My friends at the feed store warned me. "You'd better watch out, Jack," one of them said, leaning against a stack of alfalfa bales. "Those HOA folks have nothing better to do than stir up trouble. And if this Karen is half as bad as I've heard, she's just getting started." They weren't wrong, because one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, as I was hauling a load of seed corn back from the co-op, I came around the bend and found her SUV blocking the road, completely, not just parked positioned diagonally like she was reenacting a police barricade from a crime drama. And from the look on her face, I could tell this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a message. That was the moment the quiet tension turned into open conflict. And it was only the beginning. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. When I first saw Karen's SUV sitting sideways across my road that Tuesday afternoon, I thought maybe she'd broken down. Folks around here still stop to help, even if they don't particularly like the person. But when I slowed down and saw her standing next to it, clipboard in hand, not a speck of dust on her outfit, I realized this was no accident. She held up a hand like a traffic cop. "Stop right there," she called out, her voice carrying over the hum of my truck's engine. I rolled the window down and leaned my elbow on the sill. "Everything all right?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Her lips tightened into something that might have been a smile if it had any warmth to it. "This road is for residents only. Your constant agricultural traffic is a violation of our community guidelines." I glanced behind me at the trailer hitched to my truck, loaded with seed corn sacks. "Karen, this is the only access to my farm. I've been driving down this road since you were in high school." "That may be," she said crisply, "but times change. We're trying to maintain a certain standard here. And the dust, the noise, and the smell from your operations are not in line with that standard." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Operations. It's called farming. Karen, this road was here long before your HOA ever came along, and I've got an easement on it. Look it up." She sniffed like I'd just tracked mud onto her white carpet. "The HOA board will be discussing the matter. In the meantime, I'm asking you to refrain from using this road for heavy equipment." I could feel my patience fraying. "Well, I'm asking you to move your car because I've got work to do." She just stood there, unmoving, until I shut the truck off, stepped out, and walked toward her. I didn't raise my voice, but there was no mistaking the edge in it. "Move it. Karen. Now." She finally got back in her SUV, but not before scribbling something furiously on her clipboard. As she drove off, I knew I hadn't seen the last of this. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Thick cream paper, HOA letterhead. It was an official notice of violation, citing me for unauthorized use of community property and warning that continued violations may result in fines or legal action. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, got some guy named Phil who introduced himself as the HOA secretary. I explained, politely at first, that my family had used this road for decades and that I had a legal right to do so. He put me on hold for 5 minutes, came back, and said, "The board will review your claim at the next monthly meeting." I hung up thinking, this is ridiculous. But that was just round one. The following week, I was driving the tractor into town to get a part when I saw 2 bright orange traffic cones in the middle of the road. No signage, no work crew, just cones and Karen, of course, standing nearby pretending to inspect the asphalt. "Road's closed," she announced. "No, it's not," I said, climbing down from the cab. "What's the reason this time we're concerned about wear and tear from your heavy equipment?" She replied, eyes flicking to my tractor like it was a tank rolling through suburbia. Until the HOA board decides how to proceed. We're limiting access. I moved the cones myself. She stood there, sputtering about bylaws and procedure, but I was already climbing back into the tractor. Then came the inspection. One Saturday morning, I saw 3 HOA members walking along the road, clipboards in hand, taking notes and pointing at the gravel like they'd discovered a crime scene. By Monday, another letter arrived, this one accusing me of creating dust pollution and potential safety hazards. It was clear now Karen wasn't just annoyed by my farm traffic, she was building a case. I tried ignoring it, focusing on spring planting, but she didn't let up. Delivery trucks started calling me, saying they'd been stopped by a woman who told them they couldn't come down the road without permission. One guy had to park half a mile away, and we ended up hauling the feed bags by hand the rest of the way. My neighbor Hank, who'd been around even longer than me, said over coffee one morning, "She's setting you up, Jack. Next thing you know, there'll be a vote to gate that road entirely." I believed him. Things came to a head one evening when I returned from the county fair with my livestock trailer. It was after dark, and as I rounded the bend, I nearly drove straight into a tow truck parked in the road lights flashing. Hook ready. The driver told me he'd been called by the HOA to remove an abandoned vehicle. The vehicle in question was my own pickup, which I'd left at the edge of the field while I ran an errand earlier. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the stack of letters, notes, and phone messages. I wasn't just dealing with petty harassment anymore. This was a coordinated push to cut me off from my own land. And the ringleader was standing under the street lamp every night, arms folded, waiting for me to break some imaginary rule. I knew then that this wasn't going to blow over. If I wanted to protect my farm and my right to that road, I'd have to fight back. I just didn't know yet that the perfect opportunity was about to fall right into my lap. The next few weeks felt like I was living in some drawn-out neighborhood soap opera. Only there weren't any commercial breaks, just an endless reel of Karen's antics playing in real time. It started with the cones again, only this time, she went bigger. I came down the road early one morning and found a freshly painted wooden barricade stretched across both lanes, complete with reflective tape and a laminated sign that read, "Private Road, HOA Residents Only." The barricade was padlocked to 2 heavy steel posts hammered into the gravel. I sat there in my truck, coffee mug in hand, and thought about how much work it must have taken to put that up overnight. Karen didn't just want to inconvenience me, she wanted to send a message that she was in control here. I wasn't about to drive half a mile through a cornfield to avoid it. So I climbed out, grabbed my bolt cutters from the toolbox, and snipped the lock clean off. I tossed the barricade into the ditch and drove on. By the time I came back from the feed store, the barricade was back in place and Karen was there, standing behind it with 2 other HOA board members, filming me on her phone. "Smile. You're on camera," she called out, her voice sing-song sweet. I didn't smile. "You're trespassing on my easement," I said flatly, but she just waved the laminated sign in my face. The following day, I got another letter from the HOA. This one dripping with legalese, accusing me of willful destruction of community property and threatening fines of $250 per incident. That part made me laugh because if she thought a stack of fines on HOA letterhead scared me, she had no idea who she was dealing with. Still, the games kept coming. A week later, she organized what she called a dust mitigation day. Dozens of residents lined the road, taking photos every time a vehicle passed. I watched from the porch as a man in khaki shorts and boat shoes crouched down with a measuring tape, checking the width of tire tracks like he was forensics at a crime scene. Then there was the time she had a landscaper dump a massive pile of decorative river rocks right in the middle of the road. She claimed it was beautification for the neighborhood entrance, even though the so-called entrance was a quarter-mile farther down. It took me 2 hours with the skid steer to move them out of the way just so I could get the hay wagon through. It wasn't just me she was targeting either. Delivery drivers, feed trucks, and even the mailman started getting stopped and interrogated. One UPS guy told me she demanded to see his delivery permit. Another time, a vet on his way to treat one of my cows called to say a neighborhood representative had told him he'd need to park outside the subdivision and walk the last half mile in. The harassment wasn't limited to the road either. One afternoon, I found a group of HOA folks standing just inside my property line, taking pictures of my barn roof. When I asked what they were doing, Karen announced, "We're investigating possible zoning violations due to the height of your outbuildings." That's when I started documenting everything. I bought a small trail camera and mounted it to a post near the road. I kept a binder on the kitchen counter with every letter, every incident, every ridiculous accusation. My friends thought I was overreacting, but I'd lived long enough to know that people like Karen only back down when you've got a stack of evidence taller than your fence posts. Of course, she wasn't just content to play hall monitor, she wanted a spectacle. The HOA sent me a certified letter announcing an upcoming special meeting to address unauthorized use of community assets. The subtext was clear: they wanted to ban my farm traffic completely. In the days leading up to the meeting, Karen cranked up the pressure. She placed a motion-activated camera on a post facing the road and aimed right at my driveway. She hired a tow truck to idle near the corner on market days, ready to pounce on any vehicle she deemed unauthorized. She even had a young couple from the neighborhood stand out there with folding chairs, like sentries. I could see the frustration building in my own reflection every time I caught myself in the mirror. This wasn't just about a road anymore, it was about control. And she was betting I'd either lose my temper or get tired enough to give up. But here's the thing, I don't quit. The night of the meeting, I drove to the community center where the HOA held court. The parking lot was packed minivans, SUVs, and the occasional luxury sedan. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a long table where Karen sat in the middle like a judge, flanked by her board members. She gave me a tight smile as I walked in, then leaned to whisper something to the man on her right. They spent the next 20 minutes parading out a list of infractions they claimed I'd committed, blocking views with my hay wagon, creating excessive particulate matter, causing dangerous traffic conditions. By the time they were done, you'd think I was running a junkyard in the middle of their pristine neighborhood. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my cool. I reminded them that my right to that road was backed by decades of documented use and a recorded easement. I told them I'd be happy to meet any reasonable conditions for maintenance, but I wouldn't be bullied into giving up access. Karen's reply was short and sharp. "This board will be voting on a resolution to restrict all non-resident traffic effective immediately. That includes your farm equipment." I could feel every eye in the room on me, and that's when I realized they really thought they could just vote me out of my own livelihood. They didn't know it yet, but they'd just made their biggest mistake. The morning after that HOA meeting, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't sleep. I'd spent half the night replaying every smug look Karen shot me from behind that folding table, every nod from the board members when she spoke, every clap from the residents in the audience who probably didn't even know what they were clapping for. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the stack of letters and photos I'd collected. My binder was getting thicker, but evidence alone wasn't going to stop them. They wanted to cut me off completely, and if that vote passed, I'd be spending more time in court than in the fields. I was still flipping through the binder when the phone rang. It was Hank, my neighbor. "You at the diner yet?" he asked. "Not yet. Get down here. You'll want to hear this." The diner was the kind of place where news traveled faster than the coffee refills. By the time I walked in, half the regulars were already there, tucked into booths with their morning paper or gossip. Hank was sitting at the counter, waving me over with his coffee mug. When I sat down, he leaned in. "Heard something from Rick. You know, the guy who used to work for Branson Development." Branson Development was the company that had built the subdivision. "Go on," I said. Hank lowered his voice. "The HOA doesn't own that road. Never has. Developer still holds the deed. And rumor is they're looking to unload it to cut maintenance costs." That made me stop mid-sip. "You're telling me the road isn't even theirs to control?" "Exactly. Which means if someone else buys it." He let the sentence hang, grinning like he'd just handed me a winning lottery ticket. I didn't waste any time. After breakfast, I drove straight to the county records office. The place smelled like dust and old paper, and the clerk behind the desk barely looked up when I walked in. "I need to see property records for a subdivision road," I said. She tapped a few keys, printed out a sheet, and slid it across the counter. And there it was, in black and white: Branson Development, LLC listed as the legal owner of the road, with no transfer to the HOA on record. Can anyone buy it, I asked. If the owner's willing to sell, sure. You'd have to negotiate directly with them. I left the office with a photocopy of the deed and a mind already racing through possibilities. That afternoon, I called Branson Development. I expected to get bounced around between departments, but within 10 minutes, I was talking to a man named Tom, head of their property division, Mr. Peterson. He said after I explained the situation, "We've been holding that road for years, and frankly, it's been nothing but a headache. The HOA doesn't reimburse us for maintenance, and we still get complaints. We've been thinking of selling it off." I asked for a price. When he told me, I nearly laughed. It wasn't pocket change, but it was less than I'd spent last year replacing the combine header. "I can have a cashier's check in your office by Friday," I said. "Deal." He replied, "We'll draw up the papers." By the time I hung up, I was grinning so wide my cheeks hurt. For weeks, Karen had been strutting around, acting like she controlled my access. In a matter of days, I'd be holding the title to the very road she was guarding like her personal kingdom. But I wasn't about to tip my hand early. If I've learned anything from years of farming, it's that timing matters. You don't harvest before the crop's ready, and you don't show your cards before the deal's done. For the next few days, I played it cool. I still drove the road, still got glared at by Karen, still collected every petty notice they sent me. The only difference was, now every time she mouthed off, I had to fight to keep from smiling. On Thursday, I met with my attorney, Bill Cooper, in his office downtown. Bill was an old friend, the kind of lawyer who preferred plain talk over legal jargon. "You're telling me you're buying the road," he said, flipping through the draft deed. "Yep, and once you own it, you can set the terms for anyone using it. That's the plan." Bill leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. "I've been waiting for the day someone gave that HOA a taste of their own medicine. Let's make sure it's airtight." We went through the paperwork line by line, making sure there was no clause the HOA could use to challenge the sale. Then Bill drafted a road use agreement, a formal contract every user of the road would have to sign. For the HOA, that meant agreeing to a maintenance fee, one I planned to set at triple their current dues. Friday morning, I drove to Branson Development's office with a cashier's check in hand. 15 minutes later, I walked out the legal owner of the subdivision's only access road. I tucked the deed into a manila folder, slid it onto the passenger seat, and just sat there for a minute, looking at it. It's a strange feeling, holding in your hands the very thing someone's been using against you, like suddenly realizing the locked door they've been guarding is now your own front porch. As I drove back, I passed Karen jogging along the sidewalk in her matching tracksuit. She didn't wave. Of course. She just gave me that same pinched look she always did. I smiled back, but this time it wasn't forced, because now I had the upper hand, and she had no idea the ground, or in this case, the pavement was about to shift right out from under her. I might have thought I was holding all the cards, but I underestimated one thing Karen's sixth sense for when someone isn't beaten yet. It was the Monday after I'd bought the road when the first sign came. I was coming back from hauling a load of hay to a neighbor when I noticed something new. 2 private security guards standing at the entrance to the subdivision, wearing black polo shirts with community patrol stitched on the chest. They weren't HOA volunteers. These guys had radios, flashlights, and a level of self-importance that could rival Karen's. One of them held up a hand as I slowed down. "Sir, do you live here?" he asked, like we were at the gate of a military base. "No," I said, "but I own the road you're standing on." He frowned. "We've been instructed by the HOA to stop all non-resident traffic unless it's pre-approved. Then you're going to be real busy, because about half the traffic here isn't residents. UPS, FedEx, the mailman, contractors, pizza delivery. You planning to check all their permission slips too?" He didn't answer, just stepped aside. But it was clear they weren't there for random strangers. They were there for me. The next day, I got a certified letter, big bold print at the top. Notice of legal action. Inside was a 3-page threat from the HOA's attorney, accusing me of repeated trespassing and destruction of community property. They claimed they had video evidence of me damaging the barricade and demanded I cease all use of the road immediately. I almost laughed when I read it, because that community property was now legally mine. But the ink was barely dry on my deed, and I wasn't about to tip them off before my reveal, so I let them think they were still in the driver's seat. Karen wasn't slowing down either. 2 days later, I caught her planting a row of cheap plastic no trespassing signs along the road's edge, every 50 feet. Another sign. They looked like they'd been bought in bulk from the hardware store clearance bin. I pulled over and asked her what she thought she was doing. "Protecting our community," she said, straightening one of the signs like it was a priceless artifact. "From you." I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, if you spent half as much time minding your own business as you do minding mine, you'd be on vacation in Florida by now." She sniffed, ignored me, and moved to the next sign. By the end of the week, she'd called in another inspection. This time, 3 board members and a man in a polo shirt from the county zoning office showed up. They paced around my property, snapping pictures of my tractors, my equipment shed, even the chicken coop. The zoning guy was polite enough, but I could tell from his face he knew exactly what was going on. "She's been calling every day," he told me quietly as the others poked around. "Frankly, none of this is even in my department. But she's persistent. Persistent was one word for it. Relentless was another. Then came the stunt that really made my blood boil. One Saturday morning, I went to take the truck into town and found that someone had dumped 2 full yards of gravel right across the road in front of my driveway. Fresh delivery still steaming in the morning sun. No note, no explanation. But I didn't need one. I could see Karen and 2 of her friends standing on the corner, watching from a distance like kids waiting for a prank to land. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I fired up the skid steer, scooped up the gravel, and spread it over the potholes down by the bend. If they wanted to pay for road maintenance, I wasn't going to stop them. By now, it was clear Karen was building up to something, and I didn't have to wait long to find out what. The HOA sent out flyers to every mailbox in the subdivision, announcing an emergency meeting to resolve ongoing roadway conflicts with non-resident individuals. That's me, apparently. The flyer promised a final vote on enforcement measures. The day before the meeting, Karen cornered me at the edge of the road. "Tomorrow," she said with that smug half-smile, "we put this whole mess to bed. The board's ready to make it official. You're done using this road." I just smiled back. "Funny. Karen, I was thinking the same thing." She tilted her head, maybe sensing something in my tone, but I didn't give her time to chew on it. I climbed back in the truck and drove off, leaving her standing there in the dust. That night, I pulled out the manila folder with the deed and the road use agreements Bill and I had prepared. Every HOA household would get one complete with the new triple-rate maintenance fees. No one would be locked out. Of course, I wasn't Karen, but they'd be paying for the privilege. The real beauty was the agreement didn't just cover vehicles. It applied to any use of the road, including walking, jogging, biking. If they set foot on it, they were agreeing to the terms. I slept better that night than I had in months, because tomorrow wasn't just going to be the end of their harassment. It was going to be the start of something even sweeter, watching Karen's empire crack right down the middle. The morning of the meeting, I woke up before sunrise, not out of nerves, out of habit. Farming doesn't care if you're about to pull the biggest gotcha of your life. The cows still need feeding. The fences still need checking. But I'll admit, as I pitched hay into the troughs, my mind kept drifting to that manila folder sitting on the kitchen table. Inside was my ace in the hole, the signed deed proving I now owned the road, the freshly printed road use agreements, and copies of the new maintenance fee schedule. Bill Cooper, my attorney, had helped me make it watertight. The agreements were crystal clear. Every HOA resident was welcome to use the road, but they'd pay triple what they were currently paying in dues, effective immediately. The fees covered ongoing maintenance, repair, and access rights, perfectly reasonable on paper, but devastating for an HOA already stretched thin. I'd even had Bill draft a clause stating that non-payment would result in immediate suspension of access privileges. In plain English, if they didn't pay me, they couldn't legally drive on their own street. By mid-morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, rehearsing the order of things in my head. Timing was everything. I wanted the reveal to hit like a summer thunderclap, sudden, loud, and impossible to ignore. First, I'd let them think they were running the meeting. I'd sit quiet through their speeches, their evidence, their little victory lap. Then, when they called for the vote, I'd walk up to the table, lay the deed down, and watch the room tilt on its axis. I'd invited Hank along too. He wasn't part of the HOA, but he had a front row seat to the chaos for months and was more than happy to be a witness. Wouldn't miss it for the world, he'd said when I called. Before heading to the meeting, I made one more stop, the county clerk's office. I wanted certified copies of the deed, stamped and sealed, just in case Karen tried to claim it was fake. I walked out with 3, one for me, one for the HOA board, and one for the county's own records. By the time I pulled into the community center parking lot that evening, the place was buzzing. SUVs and minivans lined the lot, and people were milling around the entrance, whispering and clutching copies of the meeting flyer like it was an invitation to a gala. Inside, the folding chairs were already filling up. Karen sat in the center of the board table, flanked by her fellow members. She was wearing that powder blue blazer she saved for important occasions, her hair sprayed into an immovable helmet, her expression equal parts confidence and condescension. "Mr. Peterson," she said when she saw me, her voice carrying just enough to turn a few heads. "Nice of you to join us. Hopefully tonight we can put this matter to rest." "Oh, I think we will," I replied, smiling just enough to make her squint. The meeting started like all HOA meetings, painfully slow. The first 20 minutes were taken up with budget reports, landscaping updates, and a motion about replacing the pool furniture. Then, finally, Karen cleared her throat and tapped her pen on the table. Next item, she announced, roadway access violations. She launched into her speech like a seasoned prosecutor. Photos of my trucks on the road, videos of me moving the barricade, copies of every violation notice they'd sent me. Each time she finished a point, she looked at the audience, waiting for their nods of agreement. When she finally wrapped up, she sat back in her chair. Given the repeated nature of these violations, the board proposes a resolution effective immediately. All non-resident traffic is prohibited on our community road. Any violations will be subject to maximum allowable fines under our bylaws. There were murmurs of approval from the audience. A few people clapped. Karen looked around the room like a queen surveying her court. "Any comments before we vote?" she asked. That was my cue. I stood, picked up the manila folder from the empty chair beside me, and walked to the front of the room. The murmurs died down. Karen's smile tightened. "I've got a comment," I said, laying the folder on the table. "You can't prohibit me from using the road." "Mr. Peterson," she began, her tone syrupy. "We've been over this, actually." "We haven't." I cut in. I reached into the folder, pulled out the deed, and slid it across the table toward her. "You can't prohibit me, because as of last Friday, I own it." Silence. The kind that makes you aware of every heartbeat in the room. Karen blinked. "Excuse me," I turned the deed so it faced the audience. "This is the legal title to the road you've been trying to keep me off of. Purchased from Branson Development, who, in case you didn't know, never transferred it to the HOA. The county clerk certified it this morning." Hank, sitting in the front row, grinned like a man watching fireworks. I pulled out the stack of road use agreements and held them up. "From now on, every vehicle, bike, or pair of shoes that uses this road will do so under my terms. That means triple the current dues you're paying. Payment is due by the 1st of the month. If you don't pay, your access is revoked. Simple as that." The murmurs turned into full-blown chatter. A man in the back raised his voice. "Wait, is this even legal?" Bill Cooper, who I'd invited just in case, stood from his seat in the second row. "It's completely legal," he said. "The owner of a private road can set access terms. Your HOA doesn't own it. Never did." Karen's face drained of color, then flushed red. She opened her mouth, closed it, then grabbed the deed and flipped through it like she could will the words to change. "Meeting adjourned," I said, turning toward the door. "I'll be in touch with the agreements. Have a good evening." And with that, I walked out, leaving a room full of stunned neighbors, a fuming Karen, and the sound of my boots echoing on my road outside. By the time I got home from the community center that night, I already had 3 missed calls from unknown numbers. I didn't answer. I poured myself a glass of iced tea, sat on the porch, and let the evening breeze carry the distant hum of crickets and frogs. The show was just getting started. The next morning, the fallout began. At 7:15 a.m., Hank called me, half laughing, half coughing on his coffee. "Jack, you won't believe this. They're in full meltdown over there." I just saw Karen on the sidewalk with 2 of the board members. They were waving papers around like they were trying to start a bonfire. I chuckled. Guess they read the part about triple dues. By mid-morning, my mailbox was stuffed. Some envelopes had polite, if begrudging, acceptance-signed road use agreements with checks attached. Others were more colorful, angry handwritten notes, legal threats scribbled in red ink. One letter that simply said, "This is war," in all caps. The best, though, was the voicemail from Phil, the HOA secretary. His voice cracked halfway through. Mr. Peterson, the board would like to discuss alternative terms. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." Yeah, not happening. That afternoon, I had my first real confrontation. I was loading bags of feed from the truck when Karen marched up my driveway, heels clicking on the gravel. She was holding the deed my deed with sticky notes plastered all over it. "This," she began, "is a travesty. You can't just, I said, not even looking up from the tailgate. "The board is calling an emergency appeal. We'll fight this in court." I set the feed bag down and finally met her eyes. "Go ahead, Karen, but let me save you the trouble. The county clerk's office certified that deed. You've been trespassing on my road for years without paying a dime. I'm being generous, charging you only triple dues. I could cut you off entirely." Her lips tightened, but she didn't say another word. She spun on her heel and stalked back down the drive, the dust swirling up around her like steam from a boiling pot. By Thursday, the first payments were rolling in. Bill and I had set up a separate account just for road maintenance fees, and it was filling faster than I expected. Most residents grumbled, but they paid, even the ones who clearly hated me more than they hated writing the check. The real entertainment came from the HOA meeting minutes, which Hank somehow got his hands on and slid under my door. The tone had shifted overnight. What used to be Karen's iron grip on the room was now chaos. Half the members blamed her for provoking me. The other half wanted her gone altogether. One particularly spicy line read, "Several members expressed concern that Karen's actions have created an adversarial relationship with the road owner, resulting in increased costs for all residents." In plain English, they were turning on her. The next Saturday, I saw it with my own eyes. I was fixing the fence near the bend when a silver SUV rolled past slower than usual. Karen was in the driver's seat, but she wasn't alone. A couple I recognized from the board was in the back. Their expressions could have soured milk. Karen kept her eyes on the road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. When she passed me, I tipped my hat. She didn't tip back. And still, the small victories kept piling up. Delivery trucks no longer got stopped at the entrance. My mail arrived without drama. The cones, barricades, and plastic signs vanished overnight, as if they'd never been there. The road was quiet except for the normal hum of life and the occasional sound of my tractor, which no one dared complain about anymore. A week later, Bill called me with a grin in his voice. "Jack, you'll like this. The HOA's lawyer reached out. They want to know if you'd consider lowering the maintenance fees in exchange for a formal apology." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "Tell them no deal. They can keep paying, or they can walk." And they did keep paying. Month after month, the checks came in like clockwork, each one a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't slamming a door, it's making them knock on yours. As for Karen, she didn't resign, at least not right away, but her power was gone. Without her control over the road, she had nothing to threaten me with. She stopped patrolling the street. The clipboard disappeared. Even the sunglasses seemed to vanish. I'd catch glimpses of her now and then, usually walking her dog at dusk, head down, avoiding eye contact. It was poetic, really. She'd spent months trying to lock me out, only to end up paying me for the privilege of passing my driveway every day. One evening, I was sitting on the porch when Hank pulled up. He dropped into the chair next to mine, handed me a cold beer, and raised it in a toast. "To owning the road," he said. "To owning the road," I echoed, clinking bottles. We sat there for a while, watching the sun dip low over the fields. The gravel road stretched out in front of us, golden in the fading light. It looked the same as it always had, but now, every inch of it was mine, and every person who set foot on it knew it, Karen included. Owning that road changed more than just my commute. It changed the way the whole neighborhood functioned. For months afterward, things were quiet. No more surprise inspections. No more cones in the middle of the street. No more strangers snapping photos of my barn from the property line. The HOA kept sending their newsletters, of course, but the tone was different, less like a set of commandments from a throne, and more like a group trying not to stir up any more trouble than they already had. And Karen. She never apologized. I didn't expect her to. But her reign ended the night I dropped that deed on the table. She stopped running every meeting. She stopped patrolling the sidewalks. I still saw her, but only in passing, a quick blur of pastel sweaters and a leash in hand as she walked her little white dog. The clipboard was gone. So was the attitude. The real change came from the other residents. Slowly, people who had once crossed the street to avoid me started waving again. Some even stopped by the farm stand to buy eggs or honey, making small talk about the weather and the crops. A few admitted, in their own roundabout way, that they'd had no idea the HOA never owned the road. One man, a retired Navy vet named Bill Thompson, came up to me at the farmer's market one Saturday and shook my hand. "I voted with her," he said, looking me square in the eye. "Wish I hadn't. Won't happen again." That meant more than I let on. Financially, the road fees turned into a blessing. I'd set them aside in a dedicated account, using them to regrade the gravel every spring, keep the ditches clear, and even add better signage at the highway turnoff. Funny thing, once the road was in top shape, the same folks who complained about agricultural traffic started thanking me for keeping it so well maintained. By midsummer, even the most stubborn residents had signed the road use agreement. They could grumble all they wanted, but they weren't about to risk losing their only access in or out. Bill Cooper had made sure the contracts were airtight, and once the county clerk had recorded them, there wasn't a thing the HOA could do without my signature. It was one of the first years in a long time that I didn't dread opening my mailbox. No letters threatening fines, no fake violations, just the usual bills and, like clockwork, a stack of checks with HOA return addresses. One evening, Hank and I sat on my porch watching the sun go down. The gravel road glowed amber in the fading light, stretching all the way to the subdivision entrance. We both knew that road had been a flashpoint for months, a line in the sand neither side wanted to step over. Now, it was just a road again. "Think they've learned their lesson?" Hank asked. I took a sip of my tea and smiled, at least enough to keep the peace. And that's all I need. Truth is, I never set out to pick a fight. All I wanted was to be left alone to work my land, same as my father and grandfather before me. But when someone tries to take away what's yours, you can't just roll over. You've got to stand your ground, and sometimes standing your ground means getting creative. Karen tried to make that road her weapon. All I did was turn it around. Looking back, I think what rattled her most wasn't losing control of the road. It was losing the ability to control me. And once people saw she wasn't untouchable, the fear she'd used to keep everyone in line just evaporated. Months later, I heard through the grapevine that she'd stepped down from the HOA board entirely. The official reason was personal time, but anyone who lived here knew the truth. You can only lead a charge if you've still got an army willing to follow. Life settled into a rhythm again. Morning chores, afternoons in the fields, evenings on the porch, watching the dust settle along the road, my road. Every time I saw one of those HOA SUVs roll by, I'd give a polite nod. Some waved back, some didn't. Either way, I wasn't losing any sleep over it. And the best part, every time Karen or anyone else from that subdivision turned onto my road, they were reminded of one thing: they weren't just driving home. They were driving on ground I'd fought for, ground I'd won. Sometimes The best way to win isn't by shouting the loudest or pushing the hardest. It's by knowing your rights, doing your homework, and letting the facts speak for themselves. Karen thought she could bully me into giving up something that had been mine for generations. Instead, she handed me the opportunity to make it mine forever. Life will hand you people like that, folks who mistake intimidation for authority. Don't meet them with anger. Meet them with strategy. Stand your ground. Keep your cool. And when the time is right, make your move so decisively that they can't recover. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever had to turn the tables on someone who thought they had all the power? Tell me your story in the comments below. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next tale from the front lines of HOA drama. Trust me, they just keep getting better.